From the home offices of Ash and Flo, this is Unbillable Hours, a podcast about professional services marketing. Stick around and listen to our insights, tips, and best practices to improve your firm's marketing and even your career.
Welcome, everybody, to this latest episode of the Unbillable Hours podcast. We had a conversation about professional services sales with Mark Wainwright, who's the founder of Wainwright Insights. That's a firm that offers professional services sales, consultancy, and fractional sales management services. And we'll have him explain what that means in a little bit. The conversation was so full of insights that we actually went way over time. And so what we'll do for this one is cut it in half, like the recording, right? And turn it into a two-parter. So any further ado, let's get into part one and start it at the point where we ask Mark to introduce himself and, essentially start the conversation. Do you want to start there and explain a little bit how that works?
Sure. Yeah, I kind of stumbled across this whole kind of fractional sales management thing about 5 years ago. And I have about 20 years of experience working for and with professional services firms. So I brought those two ideas together. There's lots of fractional professionals out there, CFOs, CTOs, those sorts of things. And I brought sort of a sales lens to that fractional approach. So I work only with professional services firms, and I only work with individuals who are not full-time sales people. Mm-hmm. So a little strange. I'm offering sales management to people who aren't really comfortable with the world of sales. Even saying the term sales gets them a little squeamish. Yeah. And I offer sales management to those individuals and to those firms. And there's two fundamental parts of sales management. And one is I train and coach individuals on how to, improve their sales acumen, get more comfortable and confident with sales. And I also help build and run the systems, the sales systems that organizations need to stay organized and to kind of build that whole sort of revenue engine.
Yeah. And honestly, that's when we stumbled upon your content and your website, that's why we wanted to invite you, have you on that second part right there, because we think that the sales systems and processes, like you describe it, those need to be much better understood in our world, which is the marketing side of professional services. And we just discussed this before turning the mic on. We had a little call beforehand, a chat beforehand, and you walked us through the very basics of setting up a sales process system. You have to tell me what the better word is for a consulting practice, what that might look like, and then we can I think that's a very helpful thing to do for our listeners. So that's where we wanted to go with you today, if you don't mind, because we do, Ash and I, we talk about the importance of sales all the time. We encourage people to go into their firm's CRMs, if they exist, to drive reports, which might be helpful for the marketing. And whenever we do and have those conversations, we realize that there is some knowledge, but not very much. And former boss of mine always had this saying in German, which drove me nuts. But he said, half knowledge, I don't know if that translates well, but half knowledge often endangers the entire project. So only knowing 30% of something can be quite risky. Yeah, but there we go. Let's talk some more sales process, if you like.
I think the phrase that you just said, maybe the American version of that, is that you know just enough to be dangerous.
Yeah, exactly.
That is the one that I hear
okay,
and probably use. But it's probably good to set out a little terminology here. Let's talk about sales and marketing, because there's always a little bit of confusion. In some instances, there's a little bit of tension, maybe a little bit of conflict between the two. So I look at those two things differently. Some firms think they're the same thing, and there's a ton of overlap. But if you you can start at either end. You can start at the marketing end or the sales end. If you talk about when the ink is drying on a piece of paper on the contract and the work is to begin, what's happening at that moment are selling activities. And if you rewind the clock slowly, you're still kind of in the middle of sales activities. At some point, those activities start to overlap a little bit, maybe with marketing, and then rewinding further, you're clearly in in the world of marketing. Marketing's task is to, generate interest, awareness, engagement, and so on, and
Yeah.
then hopefully be able to, generate interest to the level where you have leads that are being kind of handed off or presented to the sales team to then work and close, right? Those are sort of like sales
Yeah.
and marketing terms, right? I also try to differentiate the two in that marketing activities are one-to-many activities
Yeah.
and sales
Mhm.
activities are one-to-one. And I also like to think that marketing is more promotional and sales is more inquiry based. So I look at those two things a little bit differently. So just to differentiate the two. And your audience may be very familiar with that. They may have those ideas in their head, but I know in professional services, often they get confused, particularly in
And-
the industries that I work in. I work with a lot of engineers and architects and
Yeah.
and those folks,
Yeah.
and they just use those terms interchangeably.
And if I just can hop on there, because you
Yeah.
said our audience might be familiar, I think they are. But I just want to point out that there's always merit in still doing what you just did and then defining it with the business. I mean, Ash and I drone on about this all the time, but
Yeah.
there's so much confusion around all these things. Just creating clarity around even the basics here sometimes already helps overcome some naughty problems in front. Just
It's-
wanted to drop that.
Yeah,
in.
it's a refresher primarily because people are aware of these things, but not the qualifiers. And because they're not looking at the qualifiers and looking at the big picture, because often when looking at some of the people who listen in to us, they kind of work on both the marketing and sales end.
Yeah, true.
And it kind of like, they mix them up purely because they're looking at the entire journey and funnel. And when you do that, you kind of miss a few things, a few nuances.
Yeah.
So especially as they hand over to like teams as they, widen their business.
Right. Great point. And also, I think if people look at that entire process, it can be confusing. And I run into that a lot with a lot of the individuals I work with, a lot of technical professionals who aren't necessarily sales or marketing minded.
Mm,
And they're overwhelmed about how do I move someone from not knowing us to, contracting work with us? How is that even possible? So anything that lacks clarity, lacks definition, just
Yeah.
becomes confusing, and they sort of short circuit, and they're like, all right, I'm not going to participate in that, which is a common problem in many professional services firms, is that you don't have enough individuals who understand and who are actively engaged in all of this, in the finding and winning new work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So definitions check, right? Or high level definitions
Check.
done. You recently wrote a blog post. I think it was part of a series actually, which and we'll put that in the show notes, where you walk people through the setup of a very foundational sale. I'm going to call it a sales process, which then can
Sure,
even
that's fine.
will even get represented in software. But to be clear, and that's why I like the article, you don't even talk about CRMs here. You just say, here's how you would represent that in a spreadsheet, and people can go and check it out. But maybe can you walk us through you just described the sliding scale. So how does this, let's presume we've got the marketing done. And I think maybe we're at the point where someone has written some email in and said that we're exploring working with your firm. Let's say we pick up there. If you agree,
Right.
like how would you structure a sales process, or how do you structure sales processes for your clients from that starting point, maybe?
Yeah, and I think we can get into the nitty gritty of that if we have time at the end. There's so many little details,
Okay.
but overall,
Yep.
from a business process standpoint, and we've talked a little bit about this, is that CRM and selling has to be a business function and a business process, and then the tools come in after that to help sort of support that process and enhance it and make it
Yeah,
I like
more
that.
efficient and more effective and things. So if organizations are struggling with sales, a lot of times that means that they don't have sort of a fundamental business process in place, or the bits and pieces of it. Who does what, when do we have certain conversations, what activities are related to advancing opportunities within our sales pipeline. If they just don't have that structure in place, then no CRM system, no silver bullet, anything is going to sort of help them be successful at that. So first and foremost, when we talk about a process, it has to be, it's a business process, and it has to do with activities and behaviors and people that are inside your firm and how they are interacting with your prospective and current clients. So that's when I look at the sales process, it always starts with the people first. And it starts with the activities and the conversations that they are having. When I refer to the sales process with the clients I work with, I refer to it as the sales conversations, because
Oh,
particularly in
interesting.
professional services, where there is a low frequency, high dollar, complex, deliverable or service offering, it inherently means that this needs to be shepherded through with conversations. Now, we've
Yeah.
all heard the information that the B2B buyer is progressing through their own sort of buying process a good ways before they start to engage prospective service consultants or people who can help them. But nevertheless, there's still conversations required. It's hard. And one of the things we really don't understand about the whole buying and selling world that I like to make sure I highlight is that we all think that marketing's hard, selling is hard. You know what else is hard? Buying is hard.
Yeah.
Buying is very, very difficult. And one of the biggest challenges of both marketing and sales is to make that easier. And we don't do a good job of that, I would say. And we, as in sort of the world of professional services, because we offer more and more complex services, we just don't make that whole buying process very easy. So from a process standpoint, it's about the people, it's about these conversations. And once you have that in place, or once you start to find something that is successful and effective, then you can start to build these systems kind of around that. And I think that's what we'll talk about in a little bit, is that what does a CRM system start to look like? What are the bits and pieces of that form around your business process?
But just one moment's pause. When you say the people in the conversations, so you define a sort of a cadence or a sequence or whatever, where we are clear about, if a prospective client comes in through the door here, or a virtual door, who talks to them, and what's the first conversation about? What's the second conversation? Like how many ever you sort of define, right? That's the idea.
Yep.
So
Yep.
okay,
Absolutely.
and you could do that right on a whiteboard or something, right? It's beginning points.
Yep.
You would just literally draw it out. Okay.
Yeah. And I think one important thing to keep in mind with all of this is that there's always a rational logic approach to all of this. It's like, what first conversation would you have with an individual that you have not had with them previously? And well, it would be a get to know you conversation, and you would want to talk less about potential work to be done and talk more about their priorities, their preferences, those types of things. And then you kind of move forward from there. So that's where and I think we get in professional services, we race to the solution really, really quickly. And so we start with that.
Look at what we have here.
You don't even get into that whole conversation. More importantly, you don't sometimes even like chart that you've done this. And when you're talking about CRM, that's a big thing. It's like, should we actually record that we've done this? Should we like put anything? They just, as you guys were saying, like go straight into the deal.
I have current clients under contract that never in the entire sales process did I pitch. Did I get into detail? Did I pull out the slide deck? Did I do anything?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That conversation never happened because of the simple fact that I approached sales from an inquiry, from inquiry, and I started asking questions, right off the bats, preferences, priorities, what's important to them, et cetera. So over time, they start to infer my expertise rather than me needing to sort of, highlight it and be explicit about it. I mean, at some point, there are a few things that I like to show to help people sort of visualize and navigate this whole sort of process, because this is a process that takes time. But I never, and maybe rarely, get to the point where I'm like, okay, now it's time to pitch, because that's just me talking. Right. And it's just that's not what this is about. If I'm going to be truly client centric, I need to be focused on them. And when I'm focused on them, that means they're doing the talking. Right. And I think a lot of times sales fails with this. And the clients that I work with, even folks that are humble engineers who, would never be sort of promotional or boastful in nature or things. Their default setting is I'm just going to talk about myself, because that's what I know. And that's what I'm comfortable with. So.
Which I think that's interesting, because as you going back to this idea of describing or maybe prescribing, I don't know, but a structure of types of conversations. You can sort of program that in, right? Imagine yourself still being at the whiteboard and saying, okay, first question, like I said, it's a get to know us meeting. Here's a couple of questions you might want to do, and then the next step is this and this and that. And yeah, you could program that to be client centric. I can see that. Now there is lots of lingo out there in sales world, and I think it's brought to us courtesy of CRM software, right? Typically people talk about stages, right? Someone comes in as a marketing qualified lead, some black box stuff happens, suddenly they're a sales qualified lead, then they become an opportunity. Can you shed some light, because we had definitions of it? Do you use this with your clients as well? Because I mean, you do have to have some steps if you define a process, but how important is that official lingo there?
The lingo and terminology can be very, very confusing. Leads, as you said, leads are people, leads are individuals, right? Or there is not some piece of work, or I work with a lot of project-based organizations. There is no project floating around, in the ether or across the universe that isn't associated with an individual. It's not floating around out there. There's always an individual associated with the lead, right? That's a lead is a person.
Yeah.
And an opportunity is that person associated with an organization, associated with work to be done, a contractable opportunity, right? So that's, a deal. That's an opportunity. And sometimes they get kind of confused. Some people, even, when they start using CRM systems, they don't see the utility in creating, because most CRM systems will separate those two things out. They'll say, okay, these are your leads and these are your deal opportunities. They don't see the utility in creating that separation. It is important, because when things become opportunities, we start looking at them a little bit differently, and we can talk about that. But yes, a lead is a person, and an opportunity is when we qualify that. And the qualification has to do with a number of things. In different businesses, different organizations have to overlay a process onto that. There can be things like timing. There can be things like understanding decision makers and decision-making processes, other things like that. It's in professional services. I tend to think we have to prioritize the qualification of the client and the qualification of the work to be done somewhat separately, but nevertheless, both are important components. I think a lot of times what we find in professional services is that service providers are simply qualifying the work to be done and not really paying enough attention to qualifying the client. So I think there's a really critical two-part sort of qualification, which moves it from a lead to an opportunity.
Interesting. And by qualifying use, I mean, in the broader sense, what we mean is we validate that that'll be a good fit. Service is easy, right? Is that the type of work we do? Do we seem to have a reasonable chance of being successful doing this?
Yep.
And when you say they don't qualify the client well enough, what's that about? Does that go into areas like, I don't know, cultural fit? Do we like the people? Is that a brand we want to associate ourselves with? I don't know. What's the...
Yeah, could it be more like, the opportunity fit, or rather the offering fit even?
Yeah, to a degree, just to make sure that I mean, there's no solution without a problem, right? And a lot of times we're out there kind of offering these solutions up and in search of a problem, which is not a good approach. But more important, like what highlights the importance of what I just said about qualifying both the work to be done and the client is that if you fast forward 6 months down the road, 12 months down the road, depending on how long this sole service delivery contracted work takes, inevitably the issues do not arise from the complex or technical complexities of the work to be done. Problems often arise, or 90% of the time, are from just the client consultant dynamic, just a lack of communication, where expectations aren't clear. There's just all kinds of different issues that arise from the relationship and not the work, right? So we're banging our heads against the wall because the client is being unresponsive, or we're just out of sync, or we're just not simpatico. So that then thinks, well, how could we avoid that? How could we address that ahead of time? And it's like, well, we go through a rigorous qualification process where we're qualifying the client and we're making sure that, we are of like mind, that we are in sync, that they do in fact have, the same goals, in mind, that we can help them achieve. So yeah, I think it's absolutely a two-part, and a lot of times We just focus on the work to be done. So yeah, so that's a big first step. That's a big first step. And we have to, the other thing I'll add to that is that all throughout the sales process, we have to be hyper aware of any yellow flags or red flags that start to crop up in this entire process. So we need to build a sales process that brings those to the surface.
Yeah, that's really interesting. If you like track this in a whole process, it makes it more efficient, and it actually helps them, from what you're saying, because why chase someone who's just going to be a constant red flag?
Right. It's true. So that the inquiry that you would bring in the early stages of it, your mind goes wild. You think, how do you like to communicate? How often do you like to communicate? How much time, should we provide for, sufficient back and forth if we're in an asynchronous sort of, communication situation? What tools do we need to communicate? How should we assess and reassess that we're on track? Can we have open and honest conversations about the progress of our work together? Are you willing to give and take as we move through this? Because we know there's going to be, speed bumps and hurdles, and there's going to be things that we run into together. Are you willing to have very genuine, open and honest conversations, or are we going to find ourselves where you're just in a cover your ass situation and we're really not having these genuine, conversations? Are we all pursuing the same goals together? Right.
Yeah.
So these are early questions that we need to suss out.
Yeah. So that's interesting because you I think we're bridging from, so we've defined the process. That's cool. Then we've discussed, or what you said there is, I think, establish very clear criteria about who gets to be taken through it, right? That's what you just talked about. And then, and now we're already in also establishing criteria from, I think, who gets to progress from one step in our process to the next, right? How do we make that sure? Because what you're describing here is, it was good enough, so we take them to step one, right? We're having the get to know them conversation, and you are outlining questions to take there, right? So okay, I guess we have to do that for every step now, right? We have to say, okay, when is someone good to move on to the next thing? Right. What this makes me want to ask is, how about responsibilities? Because that's, again, a CRM thing, right? I assign also a contact from inside my firm to the opportunity, right? So who's asking the questions? Is that always super clear, or do you recommend firms also define that, or is it just whoever brought in the opportunity or has time, or whoever picks it up, or we have two people on the senior team who do this and that's how it works? So what's your model there for the responsibility?
Right. It's a valid question. I think the larger the organization, the more complex that situation can be. But no opportunity or no deal can survive without an internal champion. So I think ultimately it comes down to an individual to champion that. Again, if we're talking about relationships and individuals in professional services that we're delivering these complex services, the people element is really important, and to have a central point of ownership is critical. If the other thing that comes from this is that if ownership and responsibility is diffuse,
nightmare.
Everybody's job is nobody's job, right? That's a huge problem on one hand. And the other thing is that when we start to kind of understand attribution, because attribution is super important, we have to be able to attribute revenue to specific individuals in an organization to understand how they're performing, how they're growing that over time, And I think a lot of times firms are hesitant to do that because they're like, oh, it was a team deal. It's like, it wasn't a team deal. It was Bill's deal. Bill brought it in. He closed it. It's Bill's thing. You are all supporting Bill and his effort. That's good. So
and if you're not super clear about that, sorry, because that is something I've seen, not being in sales, but I've witnessed the fallout from that not being clear, when there's all kinds of what we used to call tagging shenanigans, right? Stuff gets moved around, and so three partners get together, reattribute to make sure everybody gets their fair share come performance reviews, like all that nonsense. And it's not done in like sinister evil intentions. It's just people will use the wiggle room in the system if it's there, right? So I think it's important to be clear about, when you mention attribution, how that gets done and how decisions are being made if something's not clear. Like there should be I don't know how the lawyers call it, but there should be a mitigation process for, there's an exception and now our rules aren't good enough and we need to make a decision, right? How to do this. But can I ask a question about that? Your recommendation here, because you heard this from software as a service companies and other B2B businesses, like that the front end piece, like marketing gives a lead to, and this is where the bracket is, right? And then it's often a sales rep or something like that. I think, what's your recommendation for professional services firms, or what do you see happen? Does it go to the partner or the MD or whatever straight away? Like, let's say it's a credible opportunity. What's your view there? How the handover? Who does the first? When marketing is finished, who picks it up? Even
Right.
just for a short time. What's a good thing there?
It's and I mentioned this. It varies from organization to organization. Obviously, the larger organizations that have more resources they can bring, they have bigger deals. The deals are more complex. It's probably someone sort of on the project management level almost that helps coordinate this, because ultimately, if all deals sit at the partner, managing director level, whatever it is, it's that those people have so many different responsibilities in an organization. It's really hard for them to shepherd and do the day-to-day or the week-to-week that's involved in very complex deals. So, I frankly prefer that someone who is very focused, very diligent, and able to pay a lot of attention to these deals kind of own them. So I'm very happy having someone that's a little closer to sort of the project management level own opportunities.
Yeah, interesting.
Because they're task oriented. And I will tell you, the people who end up being the most successful at professional services are the people who can bring, a diligence and a rigor in an organization, have the titles, have been doing this for decades, whatever else. The people who are really, really organized succeed. So that's where I think these things end up being most successful. And I hesitate often to bring the word hustle into this, because a lot of people think, oh yeah, sales is just a big hustle. But hustle from a rigor and a diligence standpoint is super important when we start talking about sales. And you need someone leading the charge that can bring that to opportunities, particularly in professional services where these deals are big.
Yeah. And I think there's a positive back. And I mean, we've probably all been on the receiving end, right? Of partner flies in, sells the dream, and then the team is stuck with delivering it. So I think that probably tends to happen less, right? If to your point, if the project manager runs it, who's still in the trenches and knows what the team can deliver and whatnot, right? I mean, there's always you'll always have a little bit of overselling here and there, maybe even with the project managers, but I think the risks there are way less in terms of which then also makes for a better client experience, right?
So from a so we talked a bit about the qualification thing. I know people are like, well, okay, what's next? So I'll just go over it really quickly. I mean, generally the process, as the steps in the process, and if you've used a CRM system for a while, or if you've been familiar with business processes, sales process, a lot of these are built this way. But there's a qualification process, which is the fierce defender of your pipeline, right? And I want to highlight that, and we can talk about that. But you should be beating off bad opportunities with a stick, right? You should have that mentality that nothing that isn't worthy of our organization should be in our pipeline, right? So that's qualification. You're trying to find out, qualifying the people, or qualifying the opportunity, the work to be done, and you're quickly removing anything that shouldn't be there. The next step in this whole process has to do with discovery, learning, again, inquiry based, discovering the details of the work to be done, discovering the nuances of the team, of the organization, what their big goals are, what their dreams are, and primary and importance in all of this is not making your discovery focused on the tasks and what they get, right? That's task orientation. That's deliverable focused. What they get, right? What they get out of it is the shift when you move to, okay, what their ultimate goal is and what they're going to assign value to. So discovery has to be focused on what they get out of it, surfacing the value, the ultimate economic value of the work to be done, and what the client ultimately wants to achieve. So discovery is focused on that. A proposal should simply address your discovery. That's it. A proposal is not all about your organization. It's not about your awards. It's not your, the 14 resumes of your team members. It's not your 30 years of experience and your cut sheets and all that other stuff. It's your proposal is a yin-yang response to the discovery. In discovery, we understand all of these things. This is your organizational goals. This is what you want to get out of this work to be done. This is when you want to get it done by, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
This is how our proposal addresses that. This is how we will address that. This is how we will achieve the goals. This is how we will achieve the timeline, etc. That's it, right?
Yeah.
And then obviously there's the pricing. Then you bring in pricing. You're bringing your 3-option pricing. If you're fans of Blair Enns and Jonathan Stark and the other folks out there who do a really, really great job about pricing and value pricing and everything else, you provide a 3-option pricing proposals. So we get to that. And then negotiation is really important. A lot of people think, we don't need to have negotiation in our sales process. Because, once we give them a proposal that they accept, we cut 10% off in the fee because they asked us to, and then we're done. Well, you need to have negotiation there because you should be proposing solutions that invite a conversation. And number 2 will invite some level of negotiation. It's like, that's really expensive, but we really want that.
Yeah.
So negotiation has to do with kind of surfacing these default behavior in people. Like, that's really important, but we can't spend that much. I'm going to get in trouble if we spend that, So there's all these things that start to surface in negotiation because we're right at the point where the pen is about to hit the paper, and we get all these really sort of like human behavioral things starting to surface. So negotiation is a super important part. It's recognizing objections or concerns, addressing those piece by piece, and not necessarily addressing them from a price standpoint, but addressing them from what are all the pieces of the puzzle that we can use to address
a scoping standpoint.
Can we change
as well,
terms?
Right? Yeah.
Sure.
Scope,
Sure. We can pull out 20% of scope. We can do something just to get started. If we're unsure about spending $250,000 right now, let's just spend 50 and get started, which is hopefully is one of your options. Or you can say, look, let's adjust terms. You pay us up front and you get a 10% discount. You don't pay us until the work is completely, you don't pay us a cent until we've delivered everything, and you give us a 10% bumper. There's all different ways to negotiate at the end of a contract that doesn't mean you sort of dropping your fee, which chews away your profit, and there you go. So there's our framework. There's our steps. Boom, 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 boom. I just ran through them. And a CRM is one of the things that we can use to help run that.
Yeah, to replicate those. And I will recommend people find your article and read it to see how they might be able to build that thing in a spreadsheet. But I think the essentially the idea is, like, people know Jira boards, like, or these Kanban boards, right? The logic is the same in columns in the spreadsheet. You move this from the stages you just described from left to right, and there's some clarity on who are the people involved on the client side, on our who's the shepherd on our side, these types of things. I really liked wanted to make 2 points. So I liked your point about the negotiation and the options, and I think they go with each other, right? If I offer not one price but 3 options, yes, there will have to be a conversation following that proposal, right? And to your point, helping the client buy, again, if the intent is I help them pick the best option for them, right? That can be useful. You might also go in and say, I try to push them to the most expensive thing, but that's probably a losing proposition. I don't know. And the other thing I wanted to shout out is in those conversations, and I know we're talking sales, but just a reminder, if interesting pushback and interesting objections come up, do your marketing team a favor, bring those back to us, because that can inform our content planning for if you go out of the negotiation and then you're like, damn it, I wish they just understood X so they would have bought the most expensive option. Like, give us the X, right? We can turn it into a blog post. That's almost a joke here. But we can turn that into a piece of content to help whoever's doing the selling next time not even have that conversation, because it's on the marketing side of the slider you described initially, right? So and this is usually gold mine information, which and I've been in various firms, I did not always have, or I always had to ask for, and then it was like pulling teeth, blah, blah, blah. That's a very good spot to close the loop, to use a consultant phrase, between marketing and sales. Right. Bring back those negotiation questions and objections. So we really love them.
I love it. Yeah, that's great.
This is where we cut off for today. Thanks for listening in. I hope you thought this was valuable. We enjoyed this section quite a lot, and we also enjoyed the second half, where Mark dives deep into CRM systems and which ones to use and why, which you will hear next week. Until then, have a nice rest of the week, and eventually a happy weekend.
Thanks for listening to Unbillable Hours. If you want more, tune in next week. You know where to find us.